Alright, good day guys. So in this tutorial, I'm going to go through some multi-way pots. Well, one specific multi-way pot solve. And let me know if you guys want this background music. I can't remember if I had background music in the last one of this we did. Loading in. And if at any stage there's questions or comments, you can just type it in the YouTube chat and I'll answer it. Okay. Turn it down. All right. How was that? The thing is, yeah, maybe I should turn the music off just because like everyone else you can just use their own music. All right. We'll just wait for this to load. So remember some of the concepts from the previous multi-way pot tutorial we did. Loads of folding, even to very small bets. You're still continuing with most draws to like nuttish hands, but you're folding a lot of air. The air and overcard hands. If the hand can't draw to a very strong hand, as in like a hand that would beat value, or yeah, you're going to run into issues. Now, just go and have a look at the preflop ranges. This is the range for the small blind, right? And then this is the strategy. We've got. Actually, let's just pull up in the viewer just to remind us what's going on. So this is hijack open min. So roughly this range here, and then folds to the small blind. Small blind is calling. Sorry, folds to the button. Button is calling, and then the small blind overcalls. So that's the spot preflop. Small blind's got a lot of pocket pairs. Button's got a lot of stronger pocket pairs and more of the rollaway hands. And hijack has a fairly standard hijack opening range. Alright. This one was run to 6, so it's a little more precise than the previous one, so we can have a look at some of the river plays. Okay. Yeah, against the bet, you can prefer like continuing with not draw type hands. Draws to any hands that are nuttish. Okay, so now in this particular sim, this first player is going to be the small blind, the second player is going to be the hijack, and then the third player is going to be the button. Just ignore what they say. We can have a look at the equity graph. Right, so blue is the small blind. On Queen 10-6, the small blind doesn't have so many Broadway hands. And because of that lack of Broadway, the small blind's range has got very low equity. They've just got a lot of under pairs to this board. So a lot of the hands that the small blind has is really low in equity. So here, like pocket nines is down there, right? Hands that are stronger than pocket nines, any kind of flush draw, any kind of pair. Small blind Still has a little bit of 2-pair and the set of 10 set of 6s at a reasonable frequency, but most of the hands are very weak. Small blind down here at some of those offsuit hands there. 7s, 8s, 9s, 9, Jack 9, 9s, Jack 10, and then at the top, so 10 set of 6s, Queen 10. Right, so lots of basically weak pocket pairs that have just missed this board, and very few actual pair hands, even middle pairs, right? Because the pre-flop range very pocket pair heavy. All the broadways either fold or basically squeeze, and that's fine out of the small blind to construct your range like that, because on most boards you'll be able to hit some of the sets, and because you're out of position against 2 players going multi-way, potentially 3 players going multi-way with the big blind, it's not super necessary to have too many middling hands, because those middle hands are indifferent against a bet anyway. So you don't have to construct your pre-flop range to call to just be indifferent against a bet on the flop. And because you're out of position against the most number of players on the flop, you're going to be folding all of those hands, right? So no point in having them in the calling range if you're just going to fold them on the flop. Instead, use those suited broadways to squeeze, right? Heads up pot and 3-bet pot. In the squeeze pot, they're going to have a nice bit of equity going from pre-flop to the flop. And then even on the flop, heads up, you're going to have a decent chunk of equity. In addition to the blockers that they have, right? When you're squeezing pre-flop into multiple players, blockers are pretty important because you're not just blocking the opener, you're also blocking the caller as well. So that's the story of the small blind. And now, as you can see from the equity graph, the hijack and the music is still kind of distracting. All right, I'll turn it down a little bit more. How's that? From the small blind hijack, similar sort of range construction, button doing a little bit better at the top. Right, obviously there's no top set, but button just has more sets, right? Button has high density of 10s, high density of 6s, and some of the Queen 10 as well. So doing a little bit better up the top there. And then on the other hand, there's some pairs here. Right, this sort of flat area here is the 1-pair hands, and then it drops off quite sharply. There's a lot of from the button, all these Broadway pairs or gut shots in here, and then pocket pairs for the button down the bottom here. Right, so pocket pairs are pretty weak on this board. Right, the most of these under pairs, you'd much rather either hit the board with a pair or have some kind of draw. Right, on a board like Queen 10. Any kind of gut shot, right, is going to be a preferred hand than a pocket pair, right? You'd much rather have like an ace jack offsuit, right, just the guts to the 10 than the pocket pair, right? Because that particular hand, multi-way, has 4 outs to the straight, and another 3 outs to an overcard, and then another 3 outs to second pair, which is a lot better than just a pocket pair, which only has 2 outs to a set. So for those reasons, you'd be preferring those Broadway type hands. All right, let's get into some of the action. So small blind checking a lot. And now we've got the hijack. Now this particular board, as we've discussed, we're looking at the pre-flop ranges. The hijack's going to hit this. The hijack's going to have some top pairs and middle pairs in their pre-flop range. So the hijack, for that reason, can probably be making some bets to try to weaken their checking range and get some value from the other 2 players. The hijack's going to be value betting mainly against the small blind, but the button having a lot of strong hands in there will continue at a pretty high frequency. So the hijack still needs to be fairly cautious. So let's have a look at the response against this small bet. As you can see, fold or call, right? No raising yet. You're in position. If you call and then the small blind comes along as a call, then you're in position multi-way on the turn as well, which is really nice. and the small blinds kind of cap themselves. The hijack is going to slow down because they're up against 2 players. So usually calling this small bet, you can get to see both the turn and the river for free. So that's why there's a lot of calling here. And there's a lot of calling despite the fact that the small blind, when they do continue, is going to be continuing most as a squeeze. Now in this sim, against the squeeze, I didn't allow the hijack to cold call the squeeze, mainly because of RAM constraints, but they're still allowed to 3-bet like this. Right. So small blind squeeze, and now the button calls, right? So that's really what's happening. So calling with everything, it continues with keep the range together, see what the small blind does, right? Yeah. And then after the small blind makes their decision, you can go either play back against the small blind, or you go into the turn in position against 2 players or 1 player, which is not too bad considering a lot of your range are going to be drawing anyway. So if you have a set, for example, on this board, if those draws miss on the turn, your EV is going to go up really high because the rest of your range is very weak and your opponent's going to want to be betting into you. Or if the draw's complete, then the set really doesn't want to pile quite as much money in. And vice versa with the draws, usually going to be here just calling and then trying to see the river. If the draws miss on the turn and your opponent checks you, then you can either check back or bet as a bluff and then see the river. Okay, so let's have a look at an example of that. Say a brick, relative brick, which is 3. Hijack here sizing up if they wanted to, but checking a lot, and then the button here checking back a lot of these 1 pair hands on all these draws. Plus draws still betting a lot. Flush draws, gut shots, some open enders. There's a lot of gut shots on this board, and now with the 3 as well. There's the open ender with the 5-4. Because there's so many gut shots on this board, you don't really have to bet all of them, but you know, betting a lot of hands there. 45% of this turn betting range after it goes after it checks is betting. Is made up with gut shot. Continuing against a squeeze. Right, so in reality, the hijack should have some calls here. Even if they don't, right? Even if they just play, you know, 3-bet or fold against the squeeze, which is also not super unreasonable. Like the squeeze range, the cold call into squeeze range doesn't necessarily have to be too protected. Well, it certainly will be, right? It'll probably be mostly calling. The hands that continue, pretty straightforward, right? A lot of these sets and 2 pairs, about 40% of the ranges set or a 2 pair, and then you've got other kind of 1 pair hands which are basically bluff catching at this stage. So the only hands that are always continuing are the sets and 2 pairs, and everything else is a different kind of bluff catcher. Well, it's going to be rebluffing as the raise. Even the overpairs, aces and kings, are letting it go, right? Against the squeeze. So that kind of tells you how tight you need to be. Multi-way, right? You make a small bet and then you get raised, right? You're letting go. When it's still multi-way, you're letting go of overpairs, right? So don't hold on too tight to just 1 pair hands, even if it's aces kings. And that's a lot of the mistakes that very beginner players sort of make when they come into multi-way pots. Aces and kings are very strong heads up, and usually you want to get all the money in a heads up pot, even in a single raise heads up pot. But multi-way 2-bet pots, very different. And especially with very tight preflop ranges as the small blind and the button both have here. The ranges were a bit wider, then maybe you would continue with aces and kings against the squeeze, but even then, I don't think it would be more than just indifferent. So what was I looking at there? This was the folding range for the button against the squeeze after the hijack folds. Yeah, I mean, not much to say about that. Some of the middle pairs are folding, some of the top pairs are folding, some ace queen is folding. So the fact that you're folding like top pair, top kicker, over pairs against a squeeze on this kind of board, upper goes bet call raise, just goes to show how tight the ranges need to be. Check, button, bet. Here out of position, not really calling. Like calling, you get squeezed a lot. But to say bet raise and you're the hijack, like how are you continuing in between? And once again, I don't have any cold calls to when it goes bet raise, just to save RAM, but like almost everything is folding. Like what hands are even continuing? Queens, queen 10, sixes, right? This is just check and it goes bet raise. Queen 10 is starting to fold, so like top two starting to fold on this board. Right, and like here, like the reason behind this is because of how tight this squeeze range is. Sorry, this check raise range is, right? Check raise range. What's the value component? Value component is probably going to be this top pair, two pairs, and then the sets. And then like, what is a bluff? I mean, is this 10x with like a backdoor flush draw type stuff a bluff, or is it value? It's probably a bit of a merge, denying equity sort of things. And remember, here against this squeeze, sorry, against the check raise, if you're sitting in the middle and here in the hijack, you shouldn't really be continuing with any hands that don't clearly beat that value. And if the value component of this check raise is you know, strong top pairs, like top pair, top kicker, well here is queen, it would be king, queen, top pair, second kicker, and sets, and like queen 10 suited, it's not super clear that you should be continuing with hands that lose to that. So say for example, because the button here's only has got king, because the button here is, sorry, it's because the small blind here has got queen 10 suited, and makes this raise with their queen 10 suited, and the queen 10 suited is part of that value, right? Your own queen 10 suited kind of chops with that value. Queen 10 offsuit is nice because of the suits on the board here. The queen and the 10 are suited, right? So there's three combinations of queen 10 suited, and then if you have a suited version of that, then you only block one of those combinations. But if you have an offsuit version of that, you can block two of those combinations. So subtle blocker effects with queen 10 offsuit versus queen 10 suited come into play there. And then of course, flush draws, the other big component of the range. What is calling? What is indifferent? Let's have a look at the folding range first. Here against this check raise. What is folding? Top pair, top kicker. Top pair, second kicker. Right, this is just to a single check raise in this multi-way. In this multi-way 2-bet pot. So yeah, don't be afraid to fold hands which you think are very strong, because you're probably wrong. You're probably overvaluing the strength of your hand multi-way by a lot, right? I mean, most people in a heads-up pot, you're never going to be folding top pair, top kicker to a single check raise. At least not to a check raise of this size. It's a relatively small check raise, only half the pot. But going multi-way, right? The ranges get really really tight here out of the small blind. There's a lot of folding. Fold there, right? So small blind folds, and now let's have a look at the response against a check raise from the hijack. So hijack, let's say half pot, for example. Same kind of idea that's going on, right? To a lesser degree, like here, top pair, top kicker, top pair, second kicker, starting to let it go. Again, against this pot-sized check raise. Quite clearly now, a lot of top pairs letting it go. Obviously, you got two pair or better, you're not, but yeah, a lot of the top pairs letting it go. So given that a lot of top pairs are letting it go, what does the value component come up with, right? If they're just folding top pair, like you probably shouldn't check raise an overpair. Yeah, right. And you can see there's no overpairs being check raised. Even though the check raise frequency is very small, it's just saying that these overpairs just aren't strong enough to check raise. Right, the sets are. Right, the 2 pair maybe, like here, Queen 10 suited, very small amount. Queen 10 off suited, not even going for that check raise. But the value range here is mostly sets. And if it's very high density of sets, right, even hands like Queen 10 are starting to feel the heat. Queen 10 obviously still continuing because it blocks the sets and is this very strong hand. Top 2 pair is a very strong hand. But it's starting to feel the heat. It's probably going to be calling this bet. Brick comes, faces pot size bet again. And now the rest of these top pairs are letting it go. Calling here is calling to bluff catch. Queen 10, ripping it in. Alright. Why is it ripping it in? Because it blocks these 2 sets. So at this kind of stage, this jam is a cheeky merge jam with the Queen 10. With it's kind of a blocker bluff jam rather than calling. Right, the EV is so low with the Queen 10 that it would rather raise as a blocker bluff than just call. Say for example, it calls and here you're sitting in the hijack. It goes bet call and like, or the small blind here is not really calling anything, but players that you might play against will play a line. So see you open the hijack, button calls, small blind calls. Right, you check the button and the button stabs in this kind of board, and then the small blind calls. Right, that's not super uncommon. I mean, if you're a beginner, you've probably never, you might not have had that exact sort of spot, but it's a spot that does come up. Right, you've opened the pot and you've got kind of 2 callers. You've checked on the flop multi-way, and then there's a bet and a call before you. Right, how are you going to be playing hands like overpairs, top pair, top kicker, right? Versus typical folding range here, like even this top pair is starting to fold, like top pair, king queen, queen jack. The fact that you're folding top pair, just bet call, quarter pot call. Here it means that at equilibrium, the ranges need to be very tight. And if the ranges are very tight, you need to be letting hands go. And the other pairs, top pair, top kicker, they're all calling. They're not squeezing. You might be tempted to go for a squeeze because players are loose. And sure, if you have a particular read that the players that you're playing against are too loose, say for example the small blind here is too loose with their calling range, then yeah, okay, you can probably get away with a check raise squeeze. But at equilibrium with the ranges this tight, these hands just aren't strong enough. And then the value component is set of queens, set of tens. Even 2 pair isn't really getting in there too often. So like squeezing a lot of very polar range, right? Not necessarily value heavy, because yeah, like if you consider 2 pair plus to be the value component, it's only 25%, so it's got a 3-to-1 bluff to value ratio. So it's a very high bluff to value ratio, so it's very bluff heavy range, but the value that is in that range is very, set heavy. Set of queens, set of tens, set of sixes. So this is how to continue against a squeeze. Button, continuing. Always continue with queen 10, blocking those 2 sets. Set of sixes all the time, and then everything else is basically just a different, in a different sort of bluff catcher. Or kind of rebluff sort of hand, because the button doesn't have calls in this preflop sim. Yeah, so Jack, I mean, against any of these bets, the small blind is mostly just going for the check raise. So here, for example, small bet fold, right? Still just going for check raise. and it goes back to the pre-flop ranges, right? So if you look at this, the equity graph again, here for the small blind has a decent amount of strong hands, but they just have so little sort of hands that actually want to bluff catch. And that's that's an intentional construction of the small blind's range, right? The small blind has very many pocket pairs, right? And those are just missed on this board. So what's left over is you know, the set of sixes and queen 10 as the strong hands, and then everything else isn't super strong, right? But can be used as a bluff for those particular hands, right? Small blind being out of position against two players in the multi-way pot is totally fine to have a relatively unprotected checking range. Unprotected as in like not really bluff catching. And because you're not really bluff catching, right? Because most bets on the flop, the small blind will have a hand that's weaker than the value of say the later position players. And because it's weaker than the value of the later position players, and there's a player left to act behind you on your left, those hands just become minus EV to continue. And because they're minus EV to continue, you better just not have them in your pre-flop calling range. So the fact that small blind is going for a lot of check raises here, and even in the previous one, the small blind was doing the same, but check raising at a pretty high frequency. Because the small blind is going for a lot of check raises, small blind is actually going for a lot of check raises on many of these boards multi-way, right? Because these hands that were in the middle, right, are forced to fold because it's going multi-way. So because they're forced to fold on the flop, the small blind intentionally constructs their pre-flop range to flop a very polar sort of defending range, right? And because the small blind flops very polar, right, the small blind is gonna be mostly check raising, right? So it's a combination of the small blind not being able to continue very wide anyway because of how multi-way, the math behind the multi-way bluff catching works, and the pre-flop range construction combined together give you this view where the small blind is mostly continuing as a check raise going into the turn, right? Alright, so Matteo, board is bad for small blind, prefers to play raise or fold. Is that because there are not enough strong hands in the range in order to have a protected calling range? Yeah, the small blind doesn't really have to call when it goes check and then small bet. It's not super necessary to call, right? One, in order to call, you have to like beat the value component of this betting range here, right? So what is the value component of this range? Probably somewhere ballparking like top pair, like all these top pairs going down to like queen jack suited is betting. So if you can beat or chop with that, then you're at most indifferent, right? Small one doesn't have a lot of top pairs anyway, so it's not like a small one is folding any of their top pairs against just a single bet. But because of the range construction, the small one doesn't have a lot of them, and might as well just continue as a check raise. Then after the hijack gets out of the way and the button calls, right, you go and see the turn. So there's a little bit of equity denial going on there, because calling, not so great, because then the hijack can overcall. But raising is nice because it kicks the hijack out. So it's a little bit of equity denial, and the board is wet enough where equity denial, at least on the flop, is a major consideration. That mostly be the case on any board in this configuration. Jack, yeah, the small blind is going to be continuing a lot of the time as a check raise with really tight flattening range on the flop after it checks the button and the button bets, right? And that's just because of the pre-flop range construction. If there were more middling hands, right, then maybe you would have more flattening range, but the small one just doesn't have any middling hands here. They don't really have too many top pairs, or whatever. So like the small blind can just play raise or fold. If they just had loads of top pairs, then maybe the small blind would more develop a flatting range. But because the density of the sixes is very high compared to the top pairs, and the density of the queen 10 is very high compared to the top pairs, and obviously the set of tens as well, you can just continue everything as a check raise and then figure out what you're going on the turn. Small bet, fold. There's check raise range, set of tens, queen 10, sixes is sort of the value component. This top pair is getting a little bit emoji. I mean, this top pair here is top pair is overfolding. The small blind here doesn't really have any ace queen in the preflop range, so this king queen suited, queen jack suited is going for emoji sort of value check raise, and that particular range is very well protected, so you're not going to get through bet too much. What's to do with hands like ace 10 suited facing a bet? I mean, there's no reason not to just call them, right? Like, there's no folding a 10 here against a single bet, right? The hands that are folding just these weak pocket pairs, right? And remember, against most bets from the other two players, like the bluffs are going to be stronger than the pocket pairs that have missed. So because the bluffs are stronger than the pocket pairs that have missed, the small blind can just happily, seems like it's overfolding right here, folding 65% of the time. Seems like it's overfolding, but that's fine. That's just how the ranges come out. Going into the flop, right? The check back range for the other two players has a lot of EV associated with it because the small blind's range is so weak, and that EV gets sacrificed by betting. So in order to bluff catch correctly, you need to fold a lot. So when the hijack here is betting, right? Sure, like you're trying to get value from the player to your right, but if there's nothing to get value from, the other player is continuing, so the button is continuing a lot. All the top pairs. One hand's continuing, like top pair, second pair. All these are third pair. These pocket pairs in between are indifferent. Weaker pocket pairs are letting it go. Weaker ace-x is letting it go. And basically everything else that has some kind of draw is continuing. Like gut shot here, 8-7, pair, 6-5, gut shot 9-8. All these Broadway hands have either made a pair or made a gut shot on a Broadway board. So they'll be continuing against a small bet and no raises. Okay, what are we on for? So we've talked about the flop for half an hour. Let's have a look at some of these after it goes bet call. Right, so here, hijack betting, quarter pot, button call, and then the small blind here is letting it go. So hijack betting, button calling, right? Button calling because you bet out of position. Plate in position is called. The 3 is a relative brick, right? There's going to be a fair amount of value that can be had from this when you've got a very strong hand. Part of the small bet was trying to decide the action from the other two players, and after a small bet and a call, and then the small blind folds. If you look here back to the flop, like the small blind continuing as a raise 26.7% of the time, right? So that's where like the raising comes into play. And if you're not getting raised, then the player behind you here usually has a kind of middling range, right? Sure, there's some very strong hands in the buttons range, queen 10, pocket 10s, pocket 6s, and now pocket 3s would have followed against the flop bet. But they've also got a lot of single pair hands, like ace queen, king queen, or the 10x. So for that reason, it's a brick, sizing up a bit, pot size bet. Have a look at the range is making this pot size bet. Overpairs sometimes, like sets and overpairs, and the queen 10 is mainly going for this pot size bet. So if you can beat, the top pair, right, and your opponent's range is very top pair heavy, look at its calling range. 22% top pair, 16.5% second pair, 13.6% weaker pairs, 7, 6, 6, 5, and the 3 just is a total brick. It's time to polarize, right? Your aces and kings now need to get value. Sure, you run into queen 10 and pocket 6 sometimes, right? But on the flop, right, you've got kings, aces. There's 2 players that could have the set of 6s, queen 10, blah, blah, right? After you go bet call and the small blind folds, there's only 1 player that could have that, right? So you've gone to the turn and now there's half the amount of queen 10, pocket 6s, whatever, left in the remaining players' ranges, right? Little bit more than half because of this folding range here, the 30%, 34% folds, right? But the fact you put this small bet and you've seen the small blind do something, and that something is fold, right, means that the remaining players at the table are less value heavy, and so now your overpair can bet big for value, right? It was betting smallish for value on the flop, a little bit of equity denial. But going into the turn here against the button, it can bet bigger for value. Pot size bet. And which hands are folding? Some of the top pairs letting it go. All the middle pairs letting it go. Basically, any of those second pair or weaker hands are letting it go, and then some of the top pairs are indifferent. So at this stage, against this pot size bet on the turn, top pairs are indifferent. Flush draws continuing at a very high frequency. No flush draws folding here, because all these flush draws that were on the flop were either nut flush draw or a flush draw with Broadway. So for that reason, none of the flush draws are folding. Or flush draw with some kind of gut shot. I mean, so all the flush draws are continuing. And all the top pairs are continuing. How often does button raise? Sets 2 pair against a hijack C-bet. I mean, it's pot size C-bet on the turn. It has to raise too often. Like here, the set of 10s is raising about half the time. Set of 6s is raising about half the time. So you don't have to raise it too often. Is Jack 10, 10, 9 sometimes raising as a bluff. Otherwise they're folding. So, all these middle pairs and bottom pairs are basically playing raise or fold with that particular set as kind of the blocker play there. Here, this 7, 6, 6, 5, Jack 10, 10, 9. Those particular hands are within both the folding range, calling range, as well as the raising range. So they're triple point hands. Yeah, Jack. The button didn't raise any hands. Yeah, the button doesn't raise any hands. And the reason why that is because like you can call and see what the small blind does, and if you know the small blind is going to be raising a lot when they continue, why would you raise anything when you could just call and then let the small blind reopen the action? So if you've got a strong hand here, you're probably going to make more money by just calling and letting the small blind reopen the action than opening the action yourself, right? Because if you call and then the small blind raises, I mean you can come back over the top if you really want to. We're here with a set of 10s, right? And your EV is going to be pretty high, right? Or if it goes raise and you've got the set of 10s, you're just loving yourself. Set of 6s doing pretty well too. I mean, actually, in this particular point, the set of 6s is indifferent. The set of 10s, like it is really liking what's going on here, so wins a lot of money by just ripping it in. Yes, so sorry about the accuracy of this particular sim isn't super high because of the RAM constraints. Looking at multi-way sims is always difficult because if you have lots of different sizes, you run out of RAM and you can't really add too many calls against squeezes and stuff. The calling, and then the small blind is going to be raising it a fair amount because of how their preflop range was constructed. So like if you're thinking that the small blind should be just raising a lot when they do continue, and you're on the button here facing a bet, you can just flat. And the same kind of thing is going to go when it goes very multi-way as well, right? If you know that the chance that a player behind you is going to raise is pretty high, if you've got a strong hand, you should just flat yourself because you should just flat and see what happens with the rest of the action when you're in position, right? In position on the button. If you're in an early position, right, and there's lots of players behind you, then you're just going to be inviting more flats, and then you'll be out of position on the next street, right? So you don't really want to be doing this flatting everything against a bet when you're out of position, but definitely when you're in position, say button or cutoff, right, absolute position or second absolute position, you're going to be having a decent flatting range because you can just flat, and then the remaining players left to act because they're out of position will want to raise a lot, and then because they want to raise a lot, your strong hands prefer to get raised than actually bet themselves. So I guess we can look at that. Bet, call, squeeze, fold, call. Right, set of 10, set of 6 is still flatting. And then going into the same brick turn, what's the value component? Set of 10, set of 6s. Right, a little bit of queen 10 getting in there, but I mean, still checking a lot of queen 10. The queen X is just checking now, making the spot size bet. Which hands are folding? Basically, most of the top pairs folding, or basically are indifferent, and then set of 10, set of 6s calling to kind of protect the rest of the range. Queen 10 being the hand that calls all the time, Jack 10 with the draw, King Jack with the draw, calling at a very high frequency, and the hands would just rip it. Some of these sets, along with this 7-6 is going to be 7-6 of spades, I think. Yeah, 7-6 of spades. Gut shot, spade blocker, King 9, gut shot flush draw, gut shot flush draw. Right, so yeah, gut shot flush draw or pair flush draw blocking the set is jamming here against the turn. Otherwise, calling. Right, constructing a calling range like this, where you've got, you know, very strong hands like sets and two pairs, and then some hands which are, you know, pure bluff catchers, in combination with very strong draws. Doing it like that means that going into the turn, if the flush draw comes in, right, then obviously the EV of your flush is very high, and the EV of your set isn't super high. But if the flush draw doesn't come in, right, which is going to happen like 3/4 of the time, if the flush draw doesn't come in, then the EV of your sets goes through the roof because the rest of your range is very weak, right? The rest of your range is either top pair or a missed draw, right? So your opponent's going to be wanting to bet at a very high frequency into that, and then your set is very strong. So the EV of your set is very high, just calling. So say for example, call and then we get a brick, right? Rip it in, calling the sets, and queen 10 and ace 10 suited is indifferent, right? Or the queen X is folding there. Okay. All right. And then check, rip it. Same kind of deal going on. Any questions about that turn range call construction? Turn calling range construction? If you've got a strong hand, you're in position. You don't really have to be raising it into players that are taking a very polar betting line. Say call, and now we go check. Right, what hands are betting? I mean, a lot of these hands. This checking range after it goes check raise on the flop. This checking range has got a lot of give up type hands, right? There's no made hand component. And like these weak pairs, these weak pocket pairs are usually checking to give up. So check, right? Betting a reasonable size half pot. A lot of stuff is following. Top pair folding, second pair folding, pocket nines. A lot of stuff is following. And the hands that are continuing, I mean, top pair is indifferent. As we discussed, like top pair was indifferent on the flop and lower lines. So I mean, if top pair is indifferent on the flop, after it goes check raise, when you get to the turn, top pair is still going to be indifferent against a bet. So you know, given that, what's the value component of this? The value component is, you know, top pair top kicker, ace queen, and then, you know, sets and two pairs. So very much a polar line. And then after, you know, you goes bet call river brick, check, you're going to be checking back your top pair, right? So top pair there was a value hand. Top pair top kicker was a value hand on the turn, trying to get value from bluff catchers in terms of your opponent's queens and queen x and 10x. You can't really bet the river because it's not strong enough now, right? Queen 10, sorry, ace queen was also indifferent here on the turn to bet as well, between betting and checking, and same with queen 10. All the sets are betting. Set of sixes, set of tens there. Set tens betting for a slightly bigger size sometimes. So looking at that, your top pair being here on the turn will often be checking back, and it's really only top pair top kicker that can do that trick here of making a bet and then checking back the river, right? Because there's always a chance you actually get check raised, right, a second time. Against a double check raise multi-way, I mean, what do you continue with? The set and queen 10, and then some very strong draws. And then everything else is letting it go, and then just ripping it in with, you know, top set. Queen 10, I think at this stage is kind of merge bluff. Right, there's so little money left. The opponent has to call with all their draws. So queen 10 there blocks a set of tens, but also kind of gets value from like a king 10, ace 10, which has to call it off now because they put too much money in. Same kind of deal here. That was a check raise line. So that was check raise squeeze line. Fold, raise, and you're on the hijack. Hijack, calling all of them. Folding top pair already against the flop check raise. Call going to the turn, brick turn. Turn brick. Checking range pretty weak. But ace highs, checking to give up. Check. Betting half pot, respecting the 50% rule. Checking back 50% of the time. And lots of folds from the small one here in this brick. A nice and big and polar here on the turn. Again, pot sized turn bet. Folding less than half the range, so folding the correct amount. So what hands are folding? A lot of top pairs still. Over pairs still continuing. Reason why over pairs will continue against these bets compared to like top pair. One is because there's no sets, there's no top set in small line range, so you don't really block anything with that. And then you more convincingly beat any kind of very thin value that your opponent could be doing with their own ace queen or king queen. I mean, small line here only has king queen suited. And then the other thing is that your over pairs can outdraw your opponent's sets and two pairs more easily compared to, say, a top pair hand. So ace queen is on the turn here is drawing stone dead to pocket sixes and very thin against queen 10. But pocket kings and pocket aces, they still have two outs against a set, and then the extra two pair outs against two pair, right? By pairing the board. So that's why that's the distinction between these over pairs and top pair, top kicker, even though they kind of seem like the same hand. They are very similar in relative hand strength, but one has just got a stronger draw associated with it. The over pair's got a stronger draw, right? And it's a bit weird to think of an over pair as a draw, but that's really what's going on here. Right, it's drawing against the value component. And like, what is the value component? Sets and two pairs, and then like a little bit of top pair going for really thin value. And of course, you're still continuing. You're still calling with a fair amount of your top pair, but the top pair that you are calling with is indifferent between calling and folding. You're also calling with a bunch of second pair. This ace 10, pocket jacks. Is a nice hand to call because it can, I think, credibly represent a lot of bluffs on block a lot of rivered straights. So let's say 9 comes on the river, goes back call. Okay, check. And as was all in. Queen jack, straight, ripping it all in. What's calling here? Lost your open and gut shot, overcuts. Check, rip all in. Here, jack's checking back. Queen take over the half pot bet. What hands are just betting still? It's this straight and then like kind of blocking with the set. I mean, king jack in the hijack is going to be one of those hands that can call the flop raise and then call this turn bet. So when that comes in, that represents like a very large component of the hijack's range. So how many combos is it? Let's have a look here on the turn. So this open ender, I mean there's two open enders. Jack 9 suited and King Jack. King Jack has also the offsuit hand, the offsuit version of it. So that open-ended straight draw coming in at 21% of the range, which means that like if the straight comes in, suddenly like 15% of your opponent's ranges are straight. Right, and you can kind of see that here where the hands that jam or make this pot size bet. Where is the rest of the King Jack? Sorry, I'm missing a hand. Yeah, I don't know where the rest of that King Jack offsuit went to. Disappeared somehow. But anyway, 61% of this 19% range is a straight. So there you've got 12% of the ranges suddenly become the nut straight when the 9 comes in. And 12% is a lot, right? 12%, and then you have to multiply that by 1 plus the bluff to value ratio, right? And then you're talking about, you know, here against this jam, right? What is the bluff to value ratio for the jam? It's going to be more than half, right? Alpha is going to be 117 plus 144 divided by, 144 divided by 144 plus 117. So that 12% becomes this 19%, right? That 12% straight becomes this 19%. So then your opponent's range is protected by 19% hands that are either value or will bluff you alongside that value. So you can't really be betting. You can't really be betting too many hands that are kind of in between that value and the rest of your opponent's range. Right, your hand has to be very, very strong. So that straight comes in and then kind of slows down. Instead of ripping it in, you've got, you know, graded sort of bets with the different parts of the range. Queen 10, blocking small, pocket sixes go on half pot. This King Jack going for this King Jack and the set of nines going for this pot size bet. And then King Jack and the set of tens jamming the river. Right. So the hands on the river here still betting roughly, depending on where the opponents. Still trying to get value from your opponent's bluff catchers, but they're not clear value, right? They're not value that wins more than half the time at showdown, right? Or wins more than half the time when the opponent continues, I should say correctly, right? It might win more than half the time at showdown because the opponent's going to be calling with a lot of worse hands, but it's going to get raised a lot, right? Here, this quarter pot bet being raised 33.7% of the time, right? And then the Queen 10 is a different bluff catcher there. But what's the alternative? The alternative is checking and then getting jammed into anyway. So it's got to do with this value hand, Queen 10, right? Can value bet for a quarter pot because its checking EV is lower, right? So it doesn't actually have to get called by worse more than half the time, right? Or have the opponent continue with a worse hand as a call more than half the time. G'day, ML. I don't think so. I mean, this solve took like a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It took a few weeks. So, you know, solving a single multi-way flop every few weeks is not going to cause the game to end. Anyway, any questions about that line? All right. Is there any line that anyone wants to look at in particular? I know we covered a variety of lines in the last tutorial, but in this tutorial, we're probably going a bit deeper on some of the lines and talking about some of the multi-way play going to single raise pots. But single raise pots, heads up pots. But heads up pots going deep with very tight ranges is still pretty interesting because of the amount of folding even very strong hands make. And you're going to get a lot of them when you play multi-way pots. When you play a multi-way pot, after it goes bet call or something, or bet raise call or something, and you end up heads up on the turn, the ranges are very, very tight. Okay, let's have a look at check through. Yeah, check through 8 maybe. Check. Fair amount of half pot betting. Any of these lines are interested? Jack. Look at the range structure for the small blind squeeze. Yeah, okay. Bet call. There's the range construction. I mean, mostly it's just because it's continuing everything. It's just continuing everything that's decent, right? Continuing everything as a squeeze. It's continuing everything that's decent. So anything you can consider to be decent will continue. I mean, none of the top pairs are folding, and a lot of the second pairs are continuing as well. Right, it's really just folding stuff that is clearly trash multi-way. So these weak pocket pairs, this very weak gut shot, king 9 without a flush draw, ace jack without a flush draw, even ace jack offsuit with a single spade is continuing. Yeah, okay, we can have a look at the check through line on the flop. Is there a particular turn you want to look at? Look at offsuit ace. So offsuit ace, I mean, you would expect a lot of checking from small blind, right? Because small blind doesn't have anything. If you look at, say, brick instead, like a 3 or 4, right? Suddenly the small blind has something now, right? The small blind has that set of 4s, and then the other players don't have as much, right? The other players still might have the set of 4s, but the small blind has a very dense in pocket pairs preflop. So because of that density, the small blind's coming out and firing away with the pocket 4s, right? Alongside the other hands. But if it checks through and you're in the small blind and it makes something for your opponents, you just check again and your opponent's going to bet into you, right? So if you've got a very strong hand, you'd much rather just, you know, kind of essentially play in position by letting the opponents bet into you rather than you betting into the opponents. So you get the option to go for the check raise or close the action rather than giving that option to your opponent. And if they're going to bet anyway, that's the way to do it. Pot size bet into 2 players, or check and like this half pot stuff, check and this half pot stuff. But pot size bet into 2 players from the small blind seems pretty scary. 2 players in position could call. A little bit of raising here from the hijack with the set of queens that failed at a check raise on the flop. These sets here. What is the value component? The sets. What is the bluff component? Everything else. What's the bluff to value ratio? Like 1.5 to 1. Yeah, so shadow, manic, check bet, call, squeeze fold. Yeah, I mean you got a small amount of raising if you want, but not really. It's the same kind of deal. You're in position, you go onto the turn. The squeezing range is kind of polar, and the reason why it's polar is because of the pre-flop range construction. So if you go pre-flop to flop and you flop a very polar range, any kind of raise on the flop is going to be polar as well. So like if your opponent's, you know, check raising a polar range, you should really not be trying to raise that too often in position. Oh, my cat's hungry. Checks through. Pot size bet. Top air folding. I mean, what was the value in this, with this pot size bet? Top pair plus, basically. I mean, even this top pair is not really doing it very often. Mostly these sets. And what kind of bluff to value ratio are we achieving here? What is this, 15% value? Yeah, I mean it's a ridiculous bluff to value ratio. Very high bluff to value ratio. Just because it's very difficult to continue. Fold brick. I mean, yeah, okay. There's something going on with blockers here. The bluff to value ratios aren't perfect, but basically, when you're making like a pot size bet into 2 players on the turn, like you really need to be bluffing a lot. And if I solve down this to an even higher precision, a very high precision, it would probably with much better bluff to value ratios going into the turn. This particular line probably hasn't been solved down enough to get really good bluff to value ratio here. But like bluff to value ratio for this bet out of the small blind, after it checks through this pot size bet, it has to be very high, very high. The opponents need to bluff a lot in order to stop. When you're here in these other two positions, checks are on the flop, the turn comes a 4 and your opponent just pots it into two people. They need to be bluffing a lot in order for you to be able to continue profitably, right? Because there's the pot size bet on the flop, the pot size bet on the turn, which means that he needs to get two players to fold half the time because he's out of position. He needs to get two players to fold half the time in aggregate. So here, this pot size bet, 63.7 times 74.5. I mean, that ends up being a little less than half the time, right? 63.7 times 0.754, right? Folding a little bit less than half the time. So a zero EV hand here can't really profitably bluff. A draw can probably bluff with that folding frequency for these two players for this pot size bet. Then what is continuing for the hijack? Loads of stuff is folding. For the button, a lot of stuff is folding. All the made hands are folding, right? Top pair is folding. Top pair, queen jack folding. All the 10x is folding. What's it continuing with here on the turn? Fast draw's got shots. There's a very high portion of the range, and then the sets are just calling. So like exploitatively, if you get to this spot here and your opponent makes his pot size bet in two players, like you should know that they need to bluff a lot, like an enormous amount for you to properly call. Standard bluff to value ratios on the turn, heads up. You're talking in the order of 1.5 to 1, if not more, against when very deep, facing very big bet. So for example, bet call, river brick. There's still this pot bet on the river, so your opponent's basically saying he's going to go pot flop pot turn. It's not going to show up with anything, is it? Yeah, it is not going to show up anything on turn because of the way that it's been abstracted. Any questions about that? Any last minute questions or things that I've covered that you want me to explain again? Because I know I went through a lot very quickly and a lot of it was just rambly stuff, but hopefully it shows to you that there's just a lot of folding multi-way. You need to fold a lot more than you think, even against bets that are relatively small. How come you aren't here seeing 200% turn probes here? I mean, maybe you would. Depends on what the turn is. There's pot size turn there. Maybe if it's 2 diamonds. A little bit there. 6 maybe. No, it doesn't do anything. I mean, the flush comes in. Pot size 2x pot. Hijack probes. Yeah, so hijack being in the middle. I feel the quarter pot. Mostly quarter pot. Most of the bets on the flop are going to be pretty small. Multi-way. A lot of it is going to be equity denial. Here on the turn for the hijack, there's two considerations. Small blind is still very polar. The button is also somewhat polar, right? They've got a lot of air because the check back range on the flop doesn't need to be protected at all because multi-way nature. There's two players you're betting into, so the check back range on the flop can be pretty polar, and because you're betting into two polar ranges, right? The reason why you're betting is a bit different. You're not clearly getting value. You're more kind of just denying equity. There is still a component of both players' ranges that are middling hands that will call to bluff catch. A lot of stuff will fold. So going half pot works best to get the most folds for the cheapest price. Most folds by weak hands for a very cheap price. And then if you get raised by either player, mainly here the small blind, you haven't put as much money in, so you can let it go a bit easier. So example 8. Same kind of thing going there. I mean, there's a little bit of 2x pot probes back there. I mean, what is going for 2x pot probe? Normalized range, maybe. I don't know why that didn't help. Back to strategy view. Sets. There's the value component. Ridiculous bluff to value ratio there. 15 to 85 is the bluff to value ratio. 15% to 85%. Question regarding the last video where imposition was stabbing most of the value on the flop, leaving checking range unprotected without weak hands on the turn when small went for a pot. Size probe hijack still folded a lot of overpairs. Question is, do you need to bet small blind value bet sets in 2 pairs when the remainder is capped to turn set? Do you need to beat? Do you mean? Yeah. You need to beat the value here on the turn. So here when small blind goes for this pot size bet, I mean, from the look of the like 5 maybe. I mean, where is the value? Sets 2 pairs, top pair sometimes 7. I mean, 7 completes a 9-8, doesn't it? Sets 2 pair, a little bit top pair is the sort of clear value there. If you bet half pot, like some of the top pairs is folding. Like here, check. I mean, is there a turn you want? Maybe a second flush draw with another straight draw. Pot size bet. Here, what's the bluff to value ratio? What is the value? It's top pair now. Here this top pair is king queen. Here this top pair is also king queen, and it's like 2 pairs. So like when you face this pot size bet, when you face this pot size bet, like still top pair is folding. It's a little bit different in the previous board. Like there was a lot more folding with the other pairs. What was the previous board? Jack 8 something. A lot more folding with the other pairs. The small ones got more more Jack X. Here the old pairs aren't really folding, but top pairs are folding instead. Because here the top pairs really want to outdraw this top 2 pair. Why can't you bluff catch on the hijack when the button doesn't have strong hands? Thing is that the button will have strong hands. Right? Here they still, it's not like they don't have sets which check back. There's still a little bit of checks backs with these sets. Right, there's still a little bit of checking back with these top pairs. Right, and it's for that exact reason, right? The opponent's should be, you know, smashing it into you. Yeah, and it's got to do with the 50% rule. So yeah, so in multi-way pots, 50% rule still applies here on the flop. It's going to apply mostly to the two players that aren't really making any bets. So here the hijack still has a betting range. So if the hijack has a betting range, then the button should respect 50% rule against the hijack. So if the hijack has a lot of strong hands, the button's not really going to be betting more than half the time. Right, and so they're still going to have some strong hands to check back, just not as much as in the betting range. So there's still a lot of betting to deny equity. So here, when it goes check through and you face this sort of pot-sized bet, there is still some strong hands, these sets, that are there to defend. Right. 2 pair queen 10 there to defend, 6-5 there to defend. 2 of diamonds in the same line. Set of 2s. Right. Top pair folding. The reason why you can't bluff jack on the bluff catch here in the hijack. It's not you can't bluff catch, it's just that your bluff catching range needs to be a lot stronger. Right? So here's there's top pairs which are calling this bet. Knowing that the button will fold their top pairs when you call. Yeah, what's... Yeah, I mean, check back range here for the button on the flop is 11.8% top pair, 1% sets, and 0.7% 2 pair. So it's not a lot of very strong hands that check back. Mainly the stuff that gets her on the turn. So this 13% sets comes from this pocket 2s mostly, and to a lesser degree pocket 10s and pocket 6s. This 2 pair is very low frequency. We've got the normalized range. Going into the turn, this is what it is. Button didn't call all the pocket 2s pre-flop. Any other questions? Look, this tutorial was probably very confusing for beginner players, but I didn't intend it to be for beginner players. And I confuse myself sometimes when I was talking, so hopefully you guys can follow along with my rambling. A lot of what's going on in these multi-way pots is difficult to wrap your head around initially, but if you kind of remember the principles of, you know, bluff to value ratios, folding at alpha and folding multi-way at the aggregate alpha, you know, with 2 players it would be the square root, right? Is the average folding frequency. The folding frequencies need to multiply together to get the total folding frequency, and alpha is still going to apply to that. The fact that you need to be folding a lot, going multi-way because of that impact on alpha that these bets have. continuing with strong draws rather than pairs, pairs without a draw. Playing in position by calling on these sort of wet boards, right, and going multi-way with a calling range rather than raising and reopening the action. And here button on the flop against the hijack bet, it's calling everything because the small blind is likely to reopen the action. What else? Understanding how the preflop ranges hit each board and what that means for the flop strategy. So main thing here is small blinds pretty polar, and so they're going to be check raising a lot. The aggregate alpha, okay. Where's paint? Look, so alpha is equal to the bet size S of 1 plus S. But this alpha needs to be the aggregate alpha, right? So the aggregate alpha, so go multi-way, this is what's going on, right? So alpha for this bet size is going to be equal to folding frequency of each of the players multiplied together. So where I is the number of players up to, I don't want to use I. J is the number of players from J equals 1. I could just use I. Okay, I is the number of players besides hero, right? And it's just going to be alpha I, not alpha. Can't even draw my eyes correctly today. Fold I, okay. So against two players, like the aggregate folding frequency, total folding frequency FT is going to be equal to alpha. Let's delete this. It should be FT. Right, which is equal to against two players, folding frequency of the first player times folding frequency of the second player. Okay, so say for example we have a half pot bet, so right, we put a half in here. So alpha against the half pot bet is then going to be half divided by 1 plus a half, so it's going to be a third. So the total folding frequency has to be equal to alpha in order to get a 0 EV bluff to be a 0 EV check to be 0 EV as a bluff, right? And so this 1/3 has to equal the folding frequency of player 1 times the folding frequency of player 2. Okay. So say for example, player 1 folds 1/2 the time, right? Then in order to get to a third, player 2 needs to fold 2/3 of the time, right? Because 1/2 times 2/3 is equal to a third. So this 1/3 aggregate folding frequency causes Fi to be greater than Ft, right? By a significant amount, right? Because all these numbers are less than 1, right? So the individual folding frequency is always a lot higher than the aggregate folding frequency. And when you get loads of different players, when the pot goes very, very multi-way, when the pot goes very multi-way, right? Say for example, there's you know, you're playing a live game and then everyone wants to come along, right? And you get 6 opponents, so you're going 7 ways to the flop, and someone bets half pot, right? So half pot gives you an alpha of a third still, right? But then that's going to be the folding frequency of player 1 times the folding frequency of player 2 times the folding frequency of player 3, right? Times the folding frequency of player 4 times the folding frequency of player 5, right? Times the folding frequency of player 6, right? These are all multiplied together. So if you want the geometric average, right? The geometric average. The geometric average folding frequency, let's call that FG, right? FG to the power of the number of players is going to be equal to this FT number. Okay, so the geometric average. This 6 is the number of players. So say, for example, the number of players is that they're betting into is n, right? You get the geometric average is equal to FT, and FT is equal to alpha, right? So then you get the geometric average, FG, is equal to the nth root of alpha. Okay. So let's say alpha is the third, and there's 6 players. Chuck in your calculator, right? Open brackets, 1/3 to the power. Sorry, yeah, to the power of 1/6. It gives you the 6th root. 83.2%. Okay, so here in this example, here, FG is equal to 83.3%. Very high folding frequency, right? So, like, say for example, your preflop range is just the pocket pairs, right? Say you flat on the button or whatever, and you've got loads of pocket pairs, and the board is ace 7-2, and you've got all the pocket pairs from like 10-10 down to 2-2, right? How many combos is that in this range? The combos of sets, you've got 3 combos of pocket 7s and 3 combos of pocket 2s, and then everything else you've got 6 combos of 10s, 9s, 8s, 6s, 5s, 4s, 3s. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. 7 times 6, 42, plus the 6 combos here gives you 48. Right. Your total range is 48 combos on this board. You multiply that by 83.3. Divide by 100. 83.3%, you need to fold 40 combos. So out of your 48 combos, you need to fold 40 combos. Right? So if you're folding 40 combos out of your 48 combos, which are the ones you're going to fold first? 3s, 4s, 5s, 6, 7s, 9s. And then you're going to be left with all your pocket 7s, all your pocket 2s, and then a little bit of your pocket 10s, maybe bluff catching. Right? Depending on the number of players behind you, etc. Right? So when it goes very multi-way like this, it's totally fine against most bets to just play no set, no bet. just because of how the math works out. Right? Any other questions? All right. If there's no more questions and I've confused you thoroughly with my rambling and my paint math, hopefully you've learned something. If not, you can go rewatch the video and slow down my speaking, because sometimes I speak too fast. And then if you have any questions, you can always send a message in send a message in the Discord about the video, and I'll try to answer it. Yeah, I mean, I guess we can look quickly into flush turns. Like check, check, check. I mean, check, 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 and then flush comes is probably the most interesting line to look at, because like this kind of line is going to happen a lot against very passive opponents. Small blind is going to be checking a lot because the flush came in and they don't really have any flush draws on this board. Check. What's checking back? I mean, a lot of hands are flushes now, 3.4% there, but now the betting range is going to be quite heavy in the flushes. Obviously, it's not only a flush, but the value component is flush, two pair top pairs. The bet sizes is getting smaller. Checks through button, lots of button betting, still flushes, sets. Now these top pairs. Here, if you're in the hijack, it checks through and the flush comes in. What can you value bet? You're going to be value betting anything that doesn't check, right? So you're going to be betting anything that doesn't check. So this is the checking range. So what's not in the checking range is going to be the betting range. So, you know, kings, aces, ace, queen, king, queen. So all these top pairs are betting now, despite the fact the flush is coming in. But the bet size that they're making is relatively small, right? It's going still for the quarter pot, half pot. When this flush comes in, the flush completes. Suddenly, a lot of the pocket pairs in the small blinds range is now a flush draw, right? Half of the pocket pairs have a spade in them, unless they've hit a set, right? And because of that reason, you know, can you really afford to let a player with half their range being flush draws draw to a flush for almost free by checking it through? Not really. Equity denial starts to be an important factor when the board comes through to a flush here in multi-way. So betting small, half pot, quarter pot, betting half pot, what hands are folding, these pocket pairs are folding. I mean, sure, they're flush draws, but they're very weak. What hands are calling, what hands are continuing, flushes, obviously. Sets, continuing as a call, top pair, continuing as a call. Getting to the turn here, once the checks are on the flop, not a lot of the top pairs are going to be folding, right? You're not really folding your top pairs to a single bet. A lot of the time, even going multi-way, but after goes bet call, right? A lot of raises with a flush, very flush heavy, set heavy range. Calling a set of fours, queen 10, folding after it goes bet call. Some of the top pairs and very weak pocket pairs. Bet fold, and now here calling, and you see that bluff catching effect with these pocket pairs. These pocket pairs now. The small blind is very heavy in the pocket pairs, so all these pocket pairs need a bluff catch, right? The pocket pairs specifically with the spade. So that's kind of what's going on there. Check button bets. Button bet small. Which hands are folding? Very weak pairs. Even second pairs continuing all the time because the bet is so small. against a slightly bigger bet. Second pair's starting to fold. Right? So like it goes through on the checks through on the flop, and then you get to the turn. The hands on average are weaker because a lot of the stronger hands would have bet the flop. The fact that the flush comes in changes the strength of the hands a lot. Now there's this extra 10% at the top of each player's range, which is a flush. 5 to 10% at the top of each player's range, which is a flush. Really means you can't just blast off into your opponents. Can't bet very big into your opponents because that 5-10% after a couple of big bets suddenly ends up being a big chunk of their range after they've started to fold a bit, right? So even though here the small blind only has 3.1% flushes, right, and 12.7% sets, right, this combination of flushes and sets is enough to defend, such that if like you make you're making a half pot bet here, fold call, see a brick on the river, check, and then like a half pot bet, right? You can't really value bet anything weaker than a set into this kind of range, right? A lot of these top pairs and even two pairs queen 10 just checking back, right? And that's just because of the effect of this, that 15% on the flop, which now after the half pot bet and this folding, it's folding half the range, the remaining half that continues is going to be much denser in sets, right? So here two pair, 8.3%, set 23.7%, flush 5% in the calling range, right? So when you get to the river and the river's a brick, even though there's only been one bet on the flop, the small blind's range is something in the order of 20% sets. And against an opponent who has a range of 20% sets, you're not going to be value betting anything weaker than a set yourself, right? So check there, and the value component is the set of fours. Value component here is set of sixes, set of tens, and then like ripping it in with a flush. So that's how quickly the ranges can get narrow multi-way because of this math that we looked at. It really shrinks the ranges a lot, even with that, just for that first bet. Shrinks the ranges a lot, much faster than in heads-up pots. Right, that very small amount of very strong hands in your opponent's range on an early street, because of how the math plays out, ends up being a very large part of the opponent's range on the river. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. That's all I wanted to go through today, because we're going very, very late. This is a very long tutorial, and I don't want anyone falling asleep. And if my voice does put you to sleep, maybe you should watch my videos while you're in bed, and it'll help you doze off. Thanks, guys. Give me a like if you're still here at the end of this 100-minute long video stream tutorial, and I'll hope to catch you in the next one. I'll probably be running some more multi-way sims with other configurations, and then just looking through them and getting a better picture about how to play multi-way with different formations pre-flop. So thanks, guys. See you all later.